Welcome to BizTech's C-Suite Conversation Show. Our guest for today is Dr. Dennis Koo, Managing Partner of allDigitalFuture. allDigitalFuture helps companies transform in a digital world using a new and breakthrough approach, the allDigitalFuture Playbook. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Dennis.
Thank you, Brian. It's a pleasure to be here. Very nice to meet you and have this great conversation ahead.
Now, Dennis, I'm looking forward to this, but for a start, give us an overview of your very interesting background and also your role in setting up and leading TMRW Digital Group, UOB's Millennial Digital Bank.
Sure. I was an engineer by training. Graduated way back in, back then NTU was known as NTI, so you can know how far back that was. I graduated with a degree in computer engineering and subsequently went on to work in HP, where I started, actually I wrote C++ code when I first started, and was surprised when I was researching for my book that it's still the 6th most well-used programming language in the world after 30 years. So I spent 13 years in technology in HP, and then I went after that, made a switch over to join Standard Chartered Bank as their head of marketing. And in the 13 years I was in Standard Chartered Bank, I then went on to do every single product role in the retail bank, from wealth management, which was insurance, investments, deposits, to all the lending products, mortgages, personal loans, credit cards. Then ran Singapore and Malaysia for retail banking for a while before becoming the consumer head for Singapore. So consumer head of Singapore is quite a large business, almost a billion, more than a billion in income, and also overseeing the retail as well as SME and oversight of the private bank business. And then I left Standard Chartered. I went to UOB, doing the same role in the local bank now instead of a foreign bank. So I was the consumer banking head for Singapore. And then in 2017, I was asked to take up an interesting assignment to build TMRW by UOB from scratch in Thailand and Indonesia. And as I reflect back, you can actually, I can say that, I actually received 27 years or more of understudy for that job because I came from technology. I'm very well versed in all aspects of the retail bank, and also I have an MBA and also a PhD in international business. So very, very broad profile. And I found that it's very important when you undertake this kind of a digital transformation in an incumbent company of size is always very complex. So having a very broad background actually is a real benefit. But still, it was very challenging. 12 or more streams of work, brought out 500 new features, wrote 1 million lines of code, did it in 2 countries where we can't speak the language, have never lived there. You could say, we don't really understand the customers. And that's why we also did a lot of homework to make sure that we were conversant with, what customers wanted.
Now, that's an interesting thing. I'm going to ask you a very important question before we move on to allDigitalFuture.
Yeah.
What were some of the key lessons that you learned with all that complex implementation? Like you said, you're going into 2 markets that you didn't even speak the language. You're going all digital. Obviously, you start with a blank sheet of paper that has some advantages, but of course, you don't know a lot of things. Now, with the benefit of hindsight, what would you share with other CEOs and leaders who are watching this show right now?
Right, that's a great question, right? I mean, the first thing I would say is that it's not about technology, it's more digital. Those are all enablers. And sometimes when we enter thinking it's all about digital, it's all about technology, you get it all wrong. Because in the end, the customers don't want the technology and the digital, they want the benefits of it. So that was a really important lesson. And the advice that our group CEO gave us was to really take our time to design it well. Don't rush into it, because we are not the first to do a digital bank. So we should really design it and design something that can stand the test of time. And that's what we did. We took that advice. And in fact, when we started in 2017, almost the whole of 2017, we didn't build anything. We just went around to understand customers. We did a lot of research, qualitative research, quantitative research, immersed ourselves. We benchmark what other people are doing around the world, right? We try to understand the business problem. So I think in a nutshell, for any CEO listening to this, right? If you are doing this in an incumbent company, regardless of the industry you're in, you have to take a look at it holistically, right? And you got to look at the dimensions of customer, business, capabilities, which include, data, technology, but also things like how you design it. And when we say design, we mean how an architect would design a building, right? And you need to look at the methodologies, right? And then, of course, people and leadership are very important in an incumbent company, because the more successful you are, the more you are trapped in that paradigm of success. And today, those success moments are very short. So that means you need to come out of that paradigm very quickly. It's no longer 20, 30 years of success. So you've got to combine those 4 dimensions: customers, business, capabilities, people, and leadership. And the problem with an incumbent company is that they all are interacting with each other. And that, I think, if I had to put it in a nutshell, was the secret to our success. Because I spend the majority of my time looking at those dimensions and the elements within those dimensions that are interacting. And in order to be successful, you got to manage that well.
Now, Dennis, I want to add one more thing, because that's what you've just shared is so insightful. One more thing I think is also patience, because what your group CEO gave you was time as well. He didn't rush you, and you had a year to really prepare the ground. And I think probably that was another key success factor.
You can't sometimes solve complicated things, by just oversimplifying it. And unfortunately, and I think you would know this well, right? We are in the soundbite era, right? The internet, and if you go to the internet and Google, right, tips for success, you get a whole bunch of inane things like think big, take risks, hire digital savvy leaders, make sure your top management are with you. They're all meaningless in the end, because there's no context, right, in terms of how everything is put together. So I think this is also compounds the problem, right? Everybody wants it fast, right? Wants it quick, wants it cheap. But then when you ask them exactly what is it you're trying to solve, they're not very clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, which then brings you with such a great background. It brings us now to allDigitalFuture. Tell us about what it's all about, and what were your reasons around setting up this company?
Great question. So I left UOB in the middle of 2020 to form a consortium to bid for one of the wholesale bank licenses. So, unfortunately, we didn't win. Had a third license been awarded, we could have been that third license. So then I had a decision to make, right, of, hey, should I go back to a full-time executive role or do something different? And I thought it'll be so valuable for me to encapsulate my learnings, right, between 2017 and 2020, building a retail digital bank in ASEAN, the first in ASEAN, but also my experience constructing an SME bank in the bid. And I combined all that, and I wrote it in the book called Driving Digital Transformation, Lessons from Building the First ASEAN Digital Bank. And that is more than an account of what the trials and tribulations of what we did, right? That's contained in the first 4 chapters. But in the 5th chapter, we actually put together a method. So back to the question you were asking earlier, right? What can executives do to dramatically improve their chance of success, because actually the probability of success is very low. And actually, as I was working through and writing the book, and I didn't have the time to really do this when I was building tomorrow, right? It suddenly dawned on me that, yeah, no wonder the probability of success is so low. Because when you look at all the complexity, the fact that people start with solutions rather than problems, the fact that you need to change culture, change mindsets, you need to look at existing process, right? You have existing infrastructure. You've got to relook at your customer proposition. You've got to relook at how you make money. When you bring all that together, right, you can see how difficult it is. And surprisingly, or not surprisingly, right, there is no method. And I was left to my own devices in 2017 to kind of, I liken it to, I give you a 100,000 piece jigsaw, I take away the cover, and I tell you, hey, go and assemble it. So allDigitalFuture was the outcome, right? Basically, putting together in chapter 5 of my first book, I described going back, right, and looking at all the decisions we made, and then formulating really an approach out of that, that really encapsulated why we were successful, despite all the odds. And subsequent to that, in March this year, I then, with my co-author, Junkyu Choi, we put together a playbook. We converted chapter 5 into a 370-page playbook that is a step-by-step, and it's probably the first holistic step-by-step approach for digital transformation, or as I prefer to call it, it's really business transformation, involving people, process, technology, new ways of working, relooking at customers, etc., right? Because there's really, you can't just transform a business using digital. And that's what the company has set out to do, that you described earlier in introducing the company. And further to that, we then worked with NUS, and we are bringing out a new digital leaders transformation program that leverages that methodology, which we hope can help a lot of your viewers really grapple around, how can I be successful? I can't afford not to transform, because the business, the competition, the trends, the dynamics are moving so fast, but yet the failure rates are so low. So what should I do?
In fact, so just to give people a perspective of numbers and the mind-boggling rates of failure. So BCG and McKinsey have stated that around in 2018 alone, and so these are a little bit older numbers, but it just gives you an idea of the size and the waste. 1.3 trillion was spent on digital transformation.
Yeah.
Out of that, 900 billion went to waste.
Yeah.
And 70% of the businesses didn't even meet their transformation objectives.
Yes. So I think it's a big problem. And it's not just BCG, McKinsey, right? Almost every study that you read indicates that more fail than succeed. It's an exception to succeed, basically.
But is that one of the reasons, Dr. Dennis, then the fact that perhaps companies are overly ambitious, fueled then also by the vendors themselves who set unrealistic expectations?
We see there are a lot of vendors. And if you don't know what problem you're solving, everything looks like a good solution. So what we tell our clients, right, is that you don't need the best, the latest. You need the simplest solution that solves the problem. And we even say you might not want to solve the problem fully, because that last mile, right, of fully makes it too complicated, you know, and too complicated not only for you providing it, but too complicated for the customer to use it. And the favorite example I like to use, right, to kind of make people visualize this, right, is you look at the Singapore parking app, right? You pull it out, you start the app, you just key in the car park number, right? And then how long, and then that's it. Now imagine if we use the best, the latest solution, right? We'll say, okay, you don't have to key in anything. We'll use satellite, we'll, you know, automatically time where you are, charge you. I almost guarantee that you need to build a call center, right? Because that last bit of not making anyone feel anything will result in errors, right? How do you know? Yeah, I was there. Can you show me? Whereas now you key in the thing, and there's probably no need for many people to attend to the problem at all. So this is the issue, right? There's a lot of solutions, but what are you solving? That is clearly one problem. The complexity is another issue, right? It's so complicated. Man, imagine if it's so complicated and you have no method, it's going to fail, right?
Now, everyone has, okay, and critics will say, okay, this is just another new methodology. So all the consulting, whether it's BCG, whether it's McKinsey and Accenture and the like, they all have their own methodologies. What makes your methodology different?
Well, we've done our research. You look at every Ivy League, you look at any consultant, they have no holistic methodology. I've worked with many consultants, right? It's not their job to leave you with a methodology, right? After all, the whole business model is to continue to be, your provider, a consultant, right? So leaving the methodology is counter to their business model, right? And of course, that makes sense. So it's not their job to teach you how to do it. So we are actually, allDigitalFuture is more to impart the methodology to you. And then subsequently, right, you can buy hours from us where we sit down with you and help you figure out, oh, in this particular case, the method didn't work, right? And we help you tweak it so that it can work in those situations. So contrary, I would actually challenge anybody to show me a method that's holistic today, right? There is no holistic method, right? And a lot of people aren't even talking about transformation. They're talking about digitalization. And a lot of people don't even know the difference between digitalization, and digital transformation.
Absolutely, because the thing is, and you said this just a few minutes ago, the obsession is around the technology, not around the problem.
Correct. Exactly. So if you don't know the problem, how can you know the solution, right? And difficult problems need unique solutions, right? If difficult problems had simple solutions all the time, then they won't be difficult problems. So, right? It's counterintuitive, right? To say, oh, we need to do AI. Then if you ask somebody, okay, but what are you solving? Oh, I don't know. I'm not very sure, right? And do you even need AI? Let me tell you, in the first year when we were designing, right, we didn't use any technical terms. It's all about the business and the customer value proposition. And you have to go back and forth because you maybe will find a good CVP but you can't make money, right? You may have a good business model, but hey, the customer doesn't want to pay for it because they don't think that's important to them. So you got to go back and forth, iteration. In fact, one interesting thing, right? In a mid to large size company, the first question I ask you is how many times have you iterated? You say, 2, 3, bound to fail. So iteration is one of the ways you improve your probability of success.
And I think being a person that's running a startup, I can tell you that's completely in a startup mode and maybe not a large company, that's completely correct because you constantly think of the minute improvements that you could make. And then suddenly, after a period of time, you've made a quantum leap in terms of customer value proposition or improvement in the product.
Yeah, and it's great you bring up startup, right? Because startups have an easier time because you got nothing. Just starting with nothing. Now that of course has its challenge, right? Like, you're all alone. How do you scale, right? Who can you rely on, right? What I find is that if you look at those 4 dimensions, right, and you imagine a circle, right, and there's a midpoint of the circle, right? Below that circle is basically capabilities and business. And people tend to focus on capabilities and solution, right? It's part of capability, right? They tend to focus on capabilities and business. Above the center line, right, is people and leadership and customers. Businesses spend too much time below the center line. It's very internal. What solution do I have? How can I make more money? Not who are our customers? What are their problems? right? Maybe I've already solved all the existing problems. What other problems can I move to? And my people, right? What kind of mindset, what kind of shift, what's the purpose of this new thing we're doing? There's always a lot of confusion when you're doing something new because the story is not clear. So I would say that most companies, right, they focus too much internally. But as you get big, it's all about internal resource allocation, hierarchy, politics, etc. And you lose sight of customers, you lose sight of people. Right. So one way to look at it as a circle with 4 quadrants is focus on that top quadrant. Now for the startup, if you're a startup and you don't have the capabilities, right, I think you're already not going to make it. Like in your case, right, you are both from technology and broadcast. So you have the capability, but the challenge for you is what's the right customer proposition? Because there's so much competition out there, so much overlap out there, right? And what's the right business model? How do you make money, right? And in the business model, you've got 4 important things. How do you differentiate? What's your path to profit? How do you scale? And finally, what's your core competence gap? Now, very self-evident, right? Because you're nodding.
Yes.
Now, the problem there that most people don't realize immediately, right? There are 4 interconnected knobs. You turn one, the other one turns. You turn one, the other one turns. You cannot do it sequentially. Because, for example, if you want it very differentiated, your core competence gap is very big. If your core competence gap is very big, your path to profit is likely very long. Then your shareholders may not have the patience. Then you say, okay, then let's make more money quickly, right? Let's make money faster. But then you tune down your differentiation. You may not be able to scale. If you can't scale, you still have introduced all your costs already. You still have a path to profit problem. So the problems are often circular. So in a startup case, right, it's really trying, and I'm sure you've experienced this significantly in significant moments throughout the past 2 years, right? How your CVP and business model and continuously to be tweaked. So like you know, a one-time thing, right? Continuously to be tweaked. Now imagine for an incumbent, right? It's not only that, right? You add 2 more things, capabilities are missing, right? Because you're trying to do something new. You don't have those capabilities. Worse, there'll be people in the organization thinking, we don't need that. We are very successful, right? They don't realize the hollowing out, right? So when you look at the incumbent, in a way, it's much more challenging because you've got so much stuff already, right? You've got set mindsets, you've got set infrastructure, you've got set processes. All that may need to be tweaked.
Now, Dennis, I want you to help me in terms of a lens of, I'm going to wear the hat of an old legacy business.
Yes.
And I need to transform. I know this, I'm a family business, I'm listed in stock exchange, and I need to transform.
Yeah.
I'm using technology that works for me, but I know that we're falling behind if we don't transform. What are some bits of advice that, and this is obviously applied across the region, across many, many businesses. What advice would you give me?
The very first thing is, don't focus on those 2 quadrants below the line, right? Don't go and say, okay, what solution and how do I make more money, right? That can work for very easy problems. Focus on number 1, who are my customers? Do I need to target a new set of customers? No, or perhaps my existing set, there's still a lot I can do, right? What are the gaps? Often when you ask the customer, they can't really articulate the gaps. Then from the gaps, right, you need to get the insight. And the insight is really the answer to the question, why do the gaps exist? And once you know that, you know what experience to create. It's no longer, should it be this, should it be this, should it be that, right? You know what experience to create. Now, to give a very simple example of an insight, right? Because people sometimes find it hard to understand, right? This is what I say to them, right? I'm sure you've used super glue before, right? So what happens? What's your experience? What are the gaps you encounter when you use super glue?
I think one of the key challenges will be, of course, getting your fingers messy.
Yes, that's one, definitely, right? It tends to, that's why they have removers, right? Now, the other thing is that after you use a few drops, you leave it in the whatever place you keep it, and when you come back a month later, it's dried. Now that's a gap, right? Hey, I can't use it anymore. But the insight here is then, yeah, if it dries up, right? What's the cost? But it hardens, right? It hardens. And therefore, one of the insight here is that people can't use it if they buy too much. You know, it hardens.
Yes.
So then the experience is very simple, right? Let's create single use. That's how single use super glue. Now you see everywhere people are selling single use super glue, right? So there's an insight that created that. And if you don't understand the insight, or you have no insight, there's no new experience. What you are doing is exactly the same before, just selling that same bottle of super glue, copying somebody. But the first guy who realized, yeah, it hardens, right? Found that insight. Now, if you didn't use super glue before, you wouldn't know this, right?
Correct.
Therefore, you have to spend time with your clients. And a lot of people, want it to be a very effective exercise. No, the first meeting I must get something. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. It sometimes can be a very long-winded exercise, but you have to have the curiosity to say, why are you doing it this way? You know, then you may discover that it is a problem you're trying to overcome. So start there. Start there, and you will actually already increase multiple times your probability of success. If you know the problem, usually there'll be plenty of solutions. The problem is stringing the solutions together in a way that creates a great experience. Sometimes we don't start there, right? We start with people first, because it may be a very a big business that's decided, okay, I'm going to create a new venture in this area, but I'm not very clear what I'm going to do. Then we work with that company on what's your purpose? What are you trying to do? What's your ambition? Right? And to create an ambition, what kind of values do you need? What kind of behaviors do you need? What are some of the measurements for your success? And once that's a bit clearer, then you can go from there to decide what are the segments. So for anyone listening in, if you want to not be one of those that, statistics that clearly indicate that, it's not going to succeed, right? It's really start with what is the problem you're trying to solve. And you must get an insight. And getting insight is hard. It may be a very iterative process, going back and forth, right? Because some of the insights, you maybe cannot make money.
Yes, of course. And I think it's a journey as well. Dennis, it's been a fascinating conversation. I've really learned a lot. But before we leave, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Well, as I mentioned, right? I think it's very difficult to be successful without a method. So my final, soundbite, I guess, to your audience would be: we have worked together with the National University of Singapore. Next February and March, we are running a new NUS Digital Transformation Leaders Program based on our methodology, the allDigitalFuture Playbook, which I wrote with my co-author, Jun Kyu. And that's a holistic method. It's one of the world's first holistic methods that puts together customers' business capabilities, people, and leadership. And there will be an excellent opportunity to really improve your chances of success significantly if you are any company, mid to large, that's trying to tackle this problem.
Dennis, thank you very much for coming on the show.
No problem. My pleasure.
Now, we've been speaking to Dr. Dennis Khoo, Managing Partner at allDigitalFuture. I'm Brian Fernandez, and this has been BizTech C-Suite Conversation Show. This interview will be on our website, www.biztech.asia, as well as our social media platforms. It will also be on our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.